Every movie has that scene. A scene that sticks out from the rest. One that portrays characters so well that you never forget it. Usually the scene resonates with you and clouds your mind for weeks on end. After seeing Dune Part 2 in IMAX for the first time, there is a specific scene that I could not stop thinking about. The scene where Paul Atreides' character is truly revealed. And I want to discuss that scene in this video essay. It is no secret that there are many masterclasses of filmmaking in both Dune movies, mainly because Dune was directed by Denis Villeneuve, who I believe is making the best movies in modern cinema along Christopher Nolan. But no other scene showed the raw truth of Paul's character than this one. But what scene? I could be talking about when Paul rode his first sandworm, or when Raban tries to fight him, or when Paul gets his friend named Wadib, or, well, you get the idea. There are so many defining moments in Paul's character, but if you look at the arc of his character through the two movies, he consistently gains confidence in himself with each step into new territory. For example, one of the largest turning points in Part 2's narrative is Paul accepting that he is the Lisan al-Gaib, finally accepting the prophecy that the Bene Gesserit planted into Fremen society. But once Paul gains all of this confidence, what does he do? He gives into the idea of being the chosen one, an idea that he denied for so long, and truly embraces it and leads the Fremen as their leader. But how does one gain control over millions? Embrace fear and worship. And how to better do that than a speech in front of all the Fremen leaders? Moving away from Paul's character motivations and the narrative itself, I want to focus on what makes this scene so damn good. I think we can break down why it is into 7 different categories. We already briefly have discussed this point, but I want to dive deeper into why this makes sense, narratively speaking, of course. I previously mentioned Paul's character arc, but I think we can look deeper. We can go back to the first Dune movie when Paul is told the idea of the Kwisatz Haderach by Jessica, and he overhears her speaking to the Reverend Mother, asking if Paul is the one. Now, initially when this happens, Paul is taken back by the idea that his birth was simply part of the plan, that his entire existence is based on the plausible fact that he may be the chosen one. And for basically the entire rest of the movie, it stays like that. Paul witnesses the power of the prophecy and religion when he travels to Arrakis, when he sees the indigenous Fremen worshipping something that they have no proof of existing. Now, at first, this disgusts Paul. It disgusts him that his mother can be tolerant of pretty much destroying a culture of millions to manufacture someone who can
bridge space and time.
It is only in the second film when we witness Paul's view change on this. Although it does take some time because he is heavily influenced by Chani, who is one of the few that think the prophecy is a way to control people. Nevertheless, as Paul lives among the Fremen for a whole 2 years, he slowly gets exposed to the power of the story that Jessica has been spreading into their society. But there is a final piece missing. This guy right here. Previously the War Master to the Atreides family, and now friend / advisor / really colleague of Paul. Throughout the time that Gurney spends with the Fremen, he slightly pushes Paul into the direction of going to the south and becoming the Lisan al-Gaib. Paul eventually does this, but not under peer pressure, but guilt and the desire for revenge. Gurney, purposeful or not, feeds into the fact that the Harkonnens killed Paul's father and destroyed everything they loved, and deep down, he wants revenge. But up to this point, he has not sought it because his father did not believe in revenge, and the final thing that pushed him to the edge was finding out that he was Harkonnen. For Paul's entire life, he was a part of this noble, respectful family, and then figures out he was basically the grandson of Dune Hitler, or Baron Harkonnen. Now, I think that is enough background information. Let's get into the narrative of the scene itself. As Paul is making his huge speech, I noticed 4 things that happened. First of all, Jessica, who is now the Reverend Mother of the Fremen, still acts like this entire thing is a game. As she says,
Slow down.
She does not care about her son's well-being, or if he gets killed by the Fremen leaders. She simply cares if he transcends humanity and becomes the Messiah. Second thing I noticed was Paul's loss of Chani. Throughout his speech, she is enraged that someone she loves or loved would do something so far from her beliefs to lose her. But the reason that Paul was not afraid to do this was because through his visions, he knows that in the end, during the holy war that he does eventually start, he ends up with her. Now, instead of losing Gurney, his position towards Paul does change drastically. Through his speech, and especially when Paul takes out his father's ring, Gurney turns from a friend, a colleague, to a religious follower. And finally, quite obviously, Paul becomes the Lisan al-Gaib. Thankfully, we'll be moving away from the story for the rest of the video, as I have said Lisan al-Gaib way too many times already. Compared to most other scenes in the film, this one seems to have the most symbolism. Just the scene itself, and what it contains, is obvious social commentary on how easily politicians can cloud the public's mind with hopeful but bottomless promises to get them excited enough to vote for them. And this is quite plausible, because we know how much Frank Herbert wrote the story as a cautionary tale of a white messiah. This sound is downright terrifying, from the introductory battle cries to how the score accompanies Paul's rise to worship.
This is my father's ducal signet.
There is a lot to talk about. From the very beginning, the score is actually screaming at you, and you can almost hear the tension on the strings of the instruments begging to break under pressure. And all of that to introduce almost an Anakin Skywalker version of Paul. And this is new territory for the viewers because we have really only heard light music from the score, but it turns heavy to mark the transition of Paul. And it feels so different because we are so used to hearing chanting from alto and sopranos, but now it is a bunch of baritones screaming at us, preparing for war. And it's just so good. As we get inside, the score really evaporates, it barely being there. It only appears briefly when Jessica enters the room, but then after that it disappears, waiting for Chalamet's performance to take over. On the topic of Chalamet, he is the center point of this scene. His range is really shown here. I always knew he was a talented actor from his performance in King and all the romance dramas he's been in, but to show the transformation of a boy into a messiah is something that I can't really put into words. But one thing is for sure, this is a career-defining performance. It's not just Chalamet's performance that had an impact on me though. I think that when we look at Javier Bardem's portrayal of Stilgar, one thing becomes very clear. Stilgar has always acted like a mentor or a leader to Paul, as he was the leader of the Fremen community that Paul stayed with. But in this scene, you can see Stilgar looking up to Paul like a little kid looking up to his dad or his favorite superhero. This is quite terrifying, because we see in a short period of time, someone with a lot of power over a group blindly follow someone because of religion. When watching the scene, at first it may seem like there's not much going on, like there's almost no cinematography, that the camera just follows what is happening in the mise-en-scene. But that is far from the truth. From the first frame of the scene, there's so much happening. The first couple of seconds of the scene doesn't even include the congregation of Fremen leaders. Instead, it showcases the bare, lifeless surface of the south. After establishing this by going over some mountains, we arrive to the meeting structure, which is built or really just etched into the side of what looks to be an old shell of an old volcano. Then, at the next beat drop, we are transported, still in an establishing shot, but closer to the structure. Now we can see what could be made out as rocks, but really are Fremen. This shot really shows us the pure scale that the Fremen operate out of. Millions of them, just here to see what could be the Lisan al-Gaib. After resting on the gathering of Fremen for a moment, we get to see this amazing shot of Paul walking out of fog in a cloak. This really makes him ominous, like he has transcended his previous self and has become someone unrecognizable to the boy we only met 2 hours ago. Plus, you cannot tell me that the worm emerging out of the ground behind Paul is not badass. But the worm serves as proof that this is a new version of Paul. Even up to the point when Paul wrote his first sandworm, he was still afraid of these creatures, and rightfully so. But this tells us how he has conquered his fear and really the desert. He truthfully has harnessed desert power. Eventually, Paul gets to the group of people outside the structure. We can see one of the Fremen grasping onto their knife, telling us that if he really is the Lisan al-Gaib, he will have to prove it to the masses. Then, we get what, I think to be one of the best shots in the film. A bird's eye view of Paul making his way through the endless crowd of Fremen. There's something about this that just demands so much power and attention. That, once again, just 2 hours ago, he was a boy that just needed refuge. Now, he's about to lead a force of millions. This is where things start to calm down, for now at least, but not completely. Throughout Paul's speech, the camera slowly lowers, placing the audience into a vulnerable, inferior place to Paul, signifying that even the audience starts to follow Paul, despite our intimate knowledge in what is about to come. So, to close this one out, I will keep it rather basic. This scene is the turning point for a character we all love, and it just feels so good to see it done right by Hollywood and really Denis Villeneuve. I had a lot of fun editing and writing this video essay, so if you want to see more like this, let me know in the comments below, and I'll catch you in the next one.
Yakala Jeskelbit Harlahaud O Erle Chausi Jura Abzir Sihisa Kurtu Femni Dune.
Lisan al-Gaib!
Marty.
Faisi fashi snuza! Dikasha kira zulhu! Hi anzadaha! Jibihu crash! Mati!
Marty. Hashisha Chi.
Shid Gim Shari.
Sakagaib. Shuma Hoki. This is my father's ducal signet. I am Paul Muad'Dib Atreides, Duke of Arrakis! Erudi Dina Heshidani, Nelisan al-Gaib! Rui Dimenaruk Ashidi!